Welcome back, everyone, for another episode of Rise and Thrive, where we talk about everything healing and wellness. Today, we are going to be talking about the human ego and the fact that it is the most destructive force in our world. In our last video, we talked about the cycle of dis-ease, and so it's that mental, emotional, physical cycle pattern that plays out of doubt, discontentment, and disconnection, which leads to actual physical disease in our body. All of our egos are really based on fear. When we experience a doubt, we feel the need to look outside of ourselves for a sense of self, for a sense of identity. And so our ego goes in search for that sense of self. And so it's how we identify, plays a lot into our ego. Like, I identify as a creative, and there's a lot of ego that goes into that. The habitual roles that you play are a part of your ego. And really, the ego's main goal is identification and separation. So what do I mean like that? Like I just said, it's going to look for you to identify with certain things. So when we talked about discontentment, we said discontentment is really focused on me, my, more. That's all based on the ego. And then separation. So the ego will always try to create an enemy. And, in relationships and friendships and family, it needs to create an other for you. And so it'll look for those things where it makes you feel like you're right and another person is wrong. It causes conflict in relationships, but it also, like when our collective egos join together, just in the human experience, it leads to war. The human ego has inflicted more harm on people than any natural disaster. When we're in relationships and when we're in groups, we don't realize that we're taking on these roles or that we're acting out of our own ego. Do you know the harm that your own ego does in your relationships? Let's talk about it, because people don't be wanting to talk about their own ego. People will literally, you when you meet someone, you ask them what went wrong in their relationship. It is always the other person's fault.
I do. Do I understand how my ego plays a role in my relationships? Yes. In my evolution of dating in my 20s and into my 30s, I've realized how much, as you said, identifying as a creative, how much ego plays a part in that. And it's not always a negative part of the ego, but it needs to be fed. That right? It's a huge part of who we are, right? Accomplishing things, doing it to the best of our ability. So that ego has to be constantly fed. And if you have someone who is not verbally responsive, or your ego is dysfunctional and toxic, then it played for me a negative role until I understood how to control my own ego or feed my own ego in a positive way that was beneficial to both myself and my relationship.
Yeah, I mean everyone has an ego. The ego is a factor in everyone's life, and I don't know if it's bigger in men than it is in women. I think that the way that we get rid of our ego, or I guess cope with it, is by becoming aware of it. As soon as you become aware of the ego, it's not really that much of a factor anymore. And I feel like women tend to be more aware of themselves internally, just because of the internal experience we have in our own body. Like when you turn your attention inward, like every month we have a period, there's pain there, so we naturally kind of like deal with that internal thing in our body, which can help us be more aware. But if you have a male and a female in a relationship and they are both unaware of their own ego, chances are that there's some toxicity in that relationship. Yeah. And I'll also say that if you're someone that has awakened to the fact that you have been on this cycle of doubt, discontentment, and disconnection, and that your ego has So when you're on this cycle, that how the ego is created is when you start to identify with your own mind. That's what I was trying to look for. When you don't realize that the thoughts that you have constantly in your mind are just mental patterns, they're just thoughts, they're not actually tied to you. But when you actually give those thoughts a voice, you think those thoughts are actually you don't observe your own mind, your ego is probably causing a lot of drama because it needs to constantly be fed. And so I know for me in relationships before, I value when someone values what I have to say, and when they don't, I have a problem with that. And a lot of that is the ego. I want to be heard, which is fine, but it's also like I need that. I need to be heard. So yeah, that was an issue for me. I mean, when I'm in a relationship with someone, I want to be the best person they've ever been in a relationship with, which is very much ego driven. I mean, so yeah, it's played a huge part in all of my relationships, and I have really only become aware of it in like the past few years. So like you said, if you dated me like way back then, I'm sorry. Like I don't, I can't. Yeah, sorry. So
there's a date.
Right. But you even think of like in groups when people take on like certain roles, and a lot of times they're not aware of it. So like I've always been very like interested in group dynamics. I would read a lot of books as a child, like about the Salem witch trials and the Holocaust and slavery, like so many different books, because I would be intrigued by how like evil spreads, how like normal people can just all of a sudden like do like these horrendous things to one another. And so I've always been focused on like groups and how people like feed off of one another, which is why I'm focused on like community and cultivating and healing communities, because I feel like that's the only thing that will go against that. But in like workplace situations, there's always these roles that people play. So there's like the negative Nancy. There's the person who's always negative, who always has some type of criticism to say. They can't ever agree or cooperate, and they don't know that they play that role. Like everyone else knows, oh God, negative Nancy, oh here she comes again. And negative Nancy is completely unaware that she's negative Nancy. Or someone that always needs recognition. There's the person on the team that always needs recognition. There's a person on the team that withdrawals, and they may think that, or they don't ever say anything, and they may think that that's like they don't have an ego, but it's just another form of an ego. So yeah, it plays a role in everything.
Okay. How do you think people deal with, what's the worst kind of ego? Are there layers to egos, like narcissism, all those things? Do those play in the fact of egos?
Yeah, I think
or those characteristics, I should say.
The more unaware you are of your ego is the worst ego. Like the more trapped you are in your own mind of thinking that your way of viewing yourself, the world, is right, that's the worst thing. And I kind of think, I hate to bring politics into
I was
play.
going to say, what does it look like in a relationship? Like, what would a partner do that you would say they don't realize that they're being egotistical? Or
I think there's so much that we do that's egotistical. It's actually easier to talk about what someone would do that's more aware of their ego. So someone that, because everything, like literally when you're not aware, everything is like rooted in your ego. But when you're aware of it, for instance, it's very difficult for someone that is practicing awareness and that is aware of their own ego to get into arguments. I don't really get into arguments with people because there's no need. I'm not that tied to what I view as right. Like I have the truth that I believe in, but the truth doesn't need to be defended. And so like there will be sometimes when like I'll post something and someone will come on my page and I could tell that they're wanting to like debate what it is that I've posted. And a lot of times it's with when I post things about God or, you know, my beliefs or whatever. And one, I find it interesting that, I don't know, I don't go on other people's posts trying to disagree with them, but whatever. But I don't need to engage with them. Like, I don't feel the need to like go back and forth with someone on social media. It's just not the way that I for what, like,
Right.
you know. And so I feel like yeah, when you are more aware, you just don't feel the need to like engage in like these type of arguments. Now, mind you, my ego is still there. Like, I can debate, actually. Like, I can really like go back and forth.
You ready for it?
Yes, like even sometimes, like when people are like talking to me and someone tries to, you know, it doesn't happen often, but when someone does try to come at me sideways, sometimes I'll be like, "Ooh, you don't even know like what I can do with my mouth right now." But I recognize that that's my ego.
Shit, Got a big ego.
And I love that song too. But you know the thing about that song that I was thinking about is that she's aware. She's saying, she's saying, I have a big ego.